The night my farm burned, I stood in the yard in nothing but my old cotton nightgown and bare feet, watching 43 years of my life turn into a red, roaring sky. The heat slapped my face so hard I couldn't cry at first. I just kept whispering, "Lord, no, Lord, no," while the flames ate the barn, the silos, the house I was born in. By morning there was nothing left but black sticks and smoke that smelled like burnt sugar and death. That was the night my own children called me a beggar. I'm Clara May Whitaker, 64 years old, widow of Henry Whitaker, who passed 7 years ago from cancer. We had 3 children: Tomos, the eldest, Ruth Ann, and little Benjamin, who we still call Benny, even though he's 30. All my life I poured everything into that land. 212 acres of corn, soybeans, a few dairy cows, and the little orchard Henry and I planted the year we married. I never took fancy vacations, never wanted them. My joy was watching the sunrise over my own fields, hearing the creak of the porch swing, smelling coffee and bacon drifting out the screen door while the grandbabies chased chickens. After Henry died, the children said, "Mama, sell some acres, slow down." I smiled and told them the farm was my heartbeat. They rolled their eyes the way young people do when old folks get sentimental. Thomas lived in Charlotte with his wife Jessica and their 2 boys. Ruth Ann and her husband Mark were in Raleigh, always building their brand, whatever that means. Benny stayed closest, just 20 miles away in town, working construction, and coming out most Sundays for supper. He was the one who still called me Mama instead of Mom, the one who fixed fences without being asked. I thought, if anybody understood, it was Benny. The fire started in the hay barn around 2 in the morning. Lightning, they said later, though I never heard thunder. By the time the volunteer fire department got there, it was too late. I stood wrapped in a stranger's blanket, soot in my hair, watching my whole world disappear. The insurance man came 2 days later, shook his head, and told me the policy had lapsed 4 months earlier. Henry always handled the bills. After he passed, I guess I missed a notice. One missed notice and everything was gone. I had maybe $800 in my checking account and a pickup truck with 280,000 miles on it. I called my children. From the Red Cross cot they put me on in the high school gymnasium. My voice was so hoarse from smoke they barely recognized me. Thomas answered first. I told him what happened, voice cracking like dry wood. There was a long pause. Then, "Mama, I'm so sorry. We'll figure something out." But I heard Jessica in the background saying they were already stretched thin with the new mortgage. Ruth Ann cried pretty tears over the phone, promised to start a GoFundMe, then asked if I could stay in a motel for just a week or 2 while they got organized. A week or 2. As if ashes cool that fast. Benny came to the gym himself, eyes red, hugged me so hard my ribs hurt. He said, "You'll come home with me and Kayla, Mama. We'll make it work." Kayla, his wife of 4 years, stood a few steps behind, smiling that tight smile she saves for when she's being polite at church. I thanked them, but I saw the way she looked at the soot still ground into my skin. 3 days later, they moved me into the spare room that smelled like baby powder and Kayla's lavender plugins. The first night I lay awake listening to them argue in whispers through the wall. "She can't stay forever. Ben, she's my mother. Where's she supposed to go? We don't have the money. You see what groceries cost now. Then I'll pick up more over time." A long silence. Then Kayla, softer but sharper than a kitchen knife. "Your mother had all those acres and nothing put away. That's on her." I pulled the pillow over my head so they wouldn't hear an old woman cry. The next Sunday the whole family came to Benny's for dinner, first time we'd all been together since Henry's funeral. I stood at the stove in a borrowed apron making chicken and dumplings the way they all liked, trying to feel useful. The grandbabies ran circles around my legs calling me Grammy Clay Clay because they couldn't say Clara. For an hour it almost felt normal. Then Thomas cleared his throat at the table. "Mama, we've been talking." He glanced at Ruth Ann, who nodded like they'd rehearsed it. "There's a really nice assisted living place in South Charlotte. Clean, safe, activities every day. They've got a room open right now." I kept stirring the pot so they couldn't see my hands shaking. "It's not cheap," Ruth Ann jumped in. "But if we all chip in, I'm not going home," I said quietly. "Mama, be reasonable," Thomas said. "You've got no income, no house. I've got my Social Security. I can get a little place, maybe work part-time at the Coop." Jessica gave that little laugh. The one that doesn't reach her eyes. "Miss Clara, with respect, you're 64 years old and you just lost everything because you forgot to pay insurance. You need people to take care of you." The room went, church mouse, quiet. Even the babies stopped banging spoons. I looked at my eldest son, You think I'm a beggar now? Thomas flushed red. That's not because that's what it sounds like, I said, voice still soft. Like your mama's a stray dog you've got to find a kennel for. Benny started to speak up, but Kayla put her hand on his arm, and he shut his mouth. Ruth Ann tried next. Sweet as spoiled honey. Mama, we're worried about you. You're all alone. I've been alone since your daddy died, I said. I managed. The rest of dinner was quiet chewing and forced smiles. When they left, nobody hugged me except the grandbabies. That night, I sat on the edge of the narrow guest bed and stared at my smoke-stained hands. I thought about the land that was nothing but charcoal now. I thought about the way my own flesh and blood had looked at me like I was already a ghost, and that's when I remembered the card. The card was tucked in the back of Henry's old Bible, the one with the cracked leather cover he carried to church every Sunday. I hadn't opened that Bible since the funeral. After the children left Benny's house that night, I couldn't sleep. I slipped into the living room where Kayla kept the lights dimmed to ambience, and I pulled the big family Bible off the shelf. My fingers were shaking as I turned the thin pages, past the births and marriages and the single death. Henry James Whittaker, beloved husband and father. Taped to the inside back cover was a cream-colored business card, edges soft from years. Alexander Langford, Chairman and CEO, Langford Agricultural Holdings, Charlotte, New York. Snow Palo. I remembered the day Henry brought it home, maybe 15 years ago. A shiny black Suburban had pulled into our gravel drive, kicking up dust like a scene from a movie. A man in a suit that cost more than our tractor stepped out, tall and silver-haired, carrying a leather folder. Henry met him on the porch and offered sweet tea, like always. They talked for 2 hours. I stayed in the kitchen pretending to bake, but I heard every word through the screen door. Mr. Langford wanted to buy us out lock, stock, and barrel. Said our farm sat on the last big undeveloped stretch along the new interstate corridor. Offered $7 million cash. Henry laughed in his face, polite but firm. This land's been in my wife's family since 1887. Ain't for sale at any price. Langford didn't get angry. He just smiled, handed Henry that card, and said, if you ever change your mind, or if Mrs. Whittaker ever does, you call me directly, day or night. Henry told the story for years, proud he'd sent a billionaire packing. We laughed about it over supper, calling it the day the city boy learned what dirt's really worth. After Henry passed, I forgot the card existed. Now here it was, like a message from the grave. I sat on Benny's couch at 3 in the morning, turning that card over and over between my fingers. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock. I thought about Jessica's words, forgot to pay insurance, and Ruth Ann's fake tears, and the way Thomas wouldn't meet my eyes. I thought about the smell of smoke still caught in my hair. I picked up Benny's landline, insisted on keeping one for emergencies, and I dialed the cell number printed under Alexander Langford's name. It rang twice. Langford, a voice said, deep, awake, not a bit sleepy. I swallowed. Mr. Langford, you probably don't remember me. This is Clara Whittaker, my late Henry Whittaker's wife, from the farm off Highway 74. There was a pause, long enough for my heart to thump hard 3 times. Mrs. Whittaker, he said, and I could hear the smile. I will never forget good dirt. How can I help you at 3 in the morning? I told him the farm was gone, told him about the fire, the lapsed policy, my children wanting to park me in a home like an old car up on blocks. My voice shook only once, when I said the word beggar. He listened without interrupting, the way few men ever do. When I finished there was another pause, shorter this time. Mrs. Whittaker, he said gently, would you have breakfast with me tomorrow? I'll send a car. I almost laughed. I don't have anything to wear but jeans with soot on the knees. I've got a washer, he said. 8 o'clock, all right. I told him yes before fear could catch me. The next morning, a black town car pulled up outside Benny's little brick house at 7:50 sharp. The driver held the door like I was somebody. Kayla stood at the window with her mouth open, coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. Benny was the first time I'd seen her speechless. Mr. Langford Alexander was waiting at a corner table in a quiet cafe in Charlotte I'd never known existed. He stood when I walked in, pulled out my chair himself. He looked older than I remembered. Silver hair, thinner. But the eyes were the same sharp kind. Measuring. We ordered coffee. I told him everything again, slower this time. He listened the same way, nodding now and then. When I was done, he leaned back and said, I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Whittaker. Both your husband and your home. I thanked him. Now, he said, let's talk business. I won't insult you with pity. Your land is still your land. Fire or no fire, charred acres are still acres. I can have surveyors out there next week. My original offer stands, adjusted for inflation, call it 10 million even. Cash. You can walk away with your head high and never depend on anybody again. My mouth went dry. $10 million. Enough to buy 100 farms. Enough to never hear the word beggar again. But something in me, the same stubborn thing that made Henry laugh 15 years ago, whispered. I don't want to sell, I said. He raised an eyebrow. Waiting. I want to rebuild, I said. The words surprised me as much as him. I want my farm back, but I need a partner, not a buyer. Alexander Langford smiled like a man who'd just been handed an interesting puzzle. Tell me more, Clara. So I did. I talked for an hour about sustainable practices Henry and I had dreamed of but could never afford. About agritourism and picaron berries. About keeping the old farmhouse footprint exactly where it was because that's where Henry proposed under the pecan tree. I talked until my coffee went cold. When I finished, Alexander tapped the table once with his finger. 10 million is off the table if we're partners, he said. But I'll loan you 3 million at 1%, secured by the land. You run the operation. My people handle the construction and marketing. Profits split 60-40 in your favor for the first 5 years, then 50. You keep the name Whitaker Farm forever. Deal. I stared at him. Why would you do that? He looked out the window for a long moment. Because 30 years ago a widow with 3 kids turned me down flat when I tried to buy her peach orchard outside Athens. She said family land feeds the soul, not just the body. I thought she was crazy. Turns out she was right. I've bought a lot of dirt since then, Clara. Never felt good the way that orchard would have. Let me feel good this once. I reached across the table and shook his hand. His grip was warm, steady. 3 weeks later, the papers were signed. My children found out the same day the local news ran the story. Billionaire Alexander Langford partners with local widow to rebuild historic Whitaker Farm. Thomas called first, voice tight. Mama, 10 million on the table, and you said no. I let him talk until he ran out of air. Thomas, I said calmly, I'm not selling my heartbeat. I'm growing it bigger. Ruth Ann sent a text with 12 crying emojis and the words, we're so proud. I didn't answer. Benny came out to the charred land with me the day the bulldozers started clearing debris. He stood there in his work boots, eyes wet. I was wrong, Mama, he said. I should have fought harder for you. I hugged him. You're here now. That's enough. The smell of fresh turned earth replaced the smell of smoke. I stood on the exact spot where the kitchen used to be and felt Henry smiling somewhere over my shoulder, but the real reckoning with my older two is still coming. The first family meeting after the news broke was held at Thomas and Jessica's house in Charlotte, one of those big new builds with the white kitchen bigger than my old living room. I drove myself in the new pickup Alexander's company, leased for me dark green, Whitaker Farm lettered on the doors, in gold. I wore clean jeans and the soft blue sweater Henry always said brought out my eyes. My hair was still short from where the flames singed it, but it was washed and neat. I looked like a woman who had work to do, not a beggar. They were all waiting in the dining room like it was a tribunal. Thomas at the head of the table, Jessica beside him with her perfect nails tapping the wood, Ruth Ann and Mark on the other side, both holding their phones like weapons. Benny and Kayla sat at the far end, quiet, eyes on me. The grandbabies had been sent to a neighbor. Thomas didn't even let me take my coat off. Mama, this is insane. He started. You turned down $10 million to go into business with a man none of us have ever met. Do you know how many scams start exactly like this? Jessica jumped in. We Googled him. He's been sued 4 times for predatory land deals. I hung my coat on the back of the chair and sat down slowly. He offered to buy us out fair and square 15 years ago. I said, your daddy sent him packing. Alexander Langford doesn't need to prey on widows, Jessica. He preys on opportunity. And right now the opportunity is me keeping my land. Ruth Ann leaned forward, voice syrupy. Mama, we're just scared for you. You've been through trauma. People take advantage. I looked her straight in the eye. The only people who've taken advantage of me lately are sitting at this table. The room went still enough to hear the ice maker drop cubes in the kitchen. Thomas flushed dark red. That's not fair, isn't it? I said. My voice stayed soft. I didn't need to raise it. I lost everything. Everything. And the first words out of my children's mouths were about putting me away like an old dog. That's too much trouble. Not one of you asked what I wanted. Not one of you offered your own home without a time limit attached. Benny looked down at his hands. Kayla reached over and covered them with hers. Jessica tried again. We were in shock. Shock doesn't make you cruel, I said. It just shows what was hiding underneath. Mark, who usually stays quiet, cleared his throat. Mrs. Clara, with respect, $3 million in debt at your age is my debt, I cut in. Not yours. And it's 1% interest with a 5-year balloon I'll never see because the farm will be profitable long before then. I've already got contracts for organic blueberries and a wedding venue booking for next fall. Alexander's people don't play small. Thomas threw his hands up. And when it fails? When the money's gone and the bank takes the land anyway. I smiled for the first time that day. Then it fails. But it'll fail with me standing on my own dirt, not sitting in a recliner in South Charlotte watching game shows and waiting for visiting hours. Ruth Ann started crying pretty, practiced tears. You're breaking up the family. No, darlin', I said gently. You broke it the night you called me a burden. I stood up, put my coat back on. Benny finally spoke, voice rough. Mama, I'm proud of you. I walked over and kissed the top of his head like he was 6 years old again. Thank you, baby. As I reached the door, Jessica called out, so that's it, you're just cutting us off. I turned. I'm not cutting anybody off. The gate's always open. But from now on you come as guests, not landlords. And you leave your pity at home. I walked out without waiting for an answer. The November air felt clean in my lungs. The next month was a blur of mud and noise and hope. Crews poured new foundations. Greenhouse frames went up like silver skeletons. Alexander came out twice himself, boots in the dirt, asking my opinion on everything from soil amendments to the color of the farm store paint barn red. Same as always. He brought his granddaughter Lily once, a quiet girl of 10 who followed me around asking about chickens. I told her stories about Henry while we planted garlic in the raised beds. She hugged me goodbye like I was her own granny, and Alexander's eyes got suspiciously bright by Christmas. The farmhouse frame was up, same footprint, wider porches, heart pine floors salvaged from a mill in Ashe County. I moved into a little apartment over the new farm store while the house finished. It smelled like sawdust and possibility. My older children stayed away, but the grandbabies didn't. Thomas dropped the boys off one Saturday with a stiff, just for the day. They ran wild through the greenhouses, faces smeared with blueberry juice by noon. When Thomas came to pick them up, the oldest, Henry named for his granddaddy, tugged his daddy's hand. Daddy, can we come back tomorrow? Grammy Clickley said she's getting baby goats next week. Thomas looked at me over the boy's head. I just raised an eyebrow. He sighed. We'll see, bud. But they came back the next weekend. And the next. Ruth Ann showed up alone, one cold February morning. No Mark, no phone in her hand. She stood in the doorway of the store in her designer coat, looking small. I brought scones from that bakery, you like, she said. I took the box, set it on the counter. Thank you. She twisted her fingers. I'm sorry, Mama. I was ashamed of how we acted, scared too, but mostly ashamed. I nodded once. I can't expect you to forgive me today, she said quickly. I just wanted you to know, I see you now. Really see you? I walked around the counter and hugged her. She cried into my shoulder like she was 10 years old again and had broken my favorite mixing bowl. I let her cry it out. Spring came early that year. The blueberries burst into bloom like pink clouds. The new farmhouse glowed in the sunrise, white clapboards and green tin roof. Rocking chairs on the porch, waiting for evening breezes. I stood on the exact spot where Henry went down on one knee 45 years ago and I felt him there. Proud and quiet. The grand opening was set for the first Saturday in May. Half the county showed up. There was barbecue and bluegrass and children running between the rows with paper cups of lemonade. Alexander cut the ribbon with me, his arm steady around my shoulders for the cameras. The local paper ran a picture on the front page. Me in my straw hat, him in his boots, both of us grinning like fools. That night, after the last guest left and the moon rose silver over the new fields, I sat on the porch swing, same chains, new cushions, and listened to the peepers singing in the creek. Benny and Kayla brought supper and stayed late. Even Thomas and Jessica came, quieter now, helping stack chairs without being asked. Ruth Ann played tag with the grandbabies until they all collapsed in the grass laughing. Nobody talked about money or nursing homes. They just talked about how sweet the blueberries were and whether we should add a corn maze come fall. When they all drove away, I stayed on the swing a little longer. The air smelled like turned earth and honeysuckle and second chances. I whispered into the dark. We did it, Henry. And somewhere, I swear, the porch creaked like he was sitting down beside me. The first 2 seasons were harder than I let anybody see. We lost half the blueberry crop to late frost. The second spring, a contractor walked off with $30,000 of flooring money. The fancy website Alexander's marketing people built crashed the day our online store opened. I lay awake many nights in the new farmhouse listening to the wind rattle the windows, wondering if Thomas had been right after all. 66 years old, $3 million in debt, and sometimes my hands shook when I signed the payroll checks. But every morning I got up before dawn, made coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and walked the rows with the sunrise, turning the dew pink. I learned words I never thought I'd need. EBITDA, cost of goods sold, search engine optimization. Alexander sent a quiet woman named Margaret, who wore cowboy boots and carried a laptop. She sat at my kitchen table 3 days a week and taught me how to read profit and loss statements without crying. By the third year, the farm turned its first real black ink. Small, but black all the same. The weddings started coming. City brides wanted authentic and were willing to pay for it. We put white lights in the pecan trees and built an open-air pavilion out of reclaimed tobacco barnwood. I stood in the back many Saturday nights in my best dress watching strangers promise forever on the same ground where Henry and I had done the same thing with $25 and a borrowed suit. I always cried a little. Nobody noticed. They thought it was hay fever. The children settled into new rhythms. Benny quit construction and came to run the equipment full-time. Kayla, who I once thought only cared about lavender plugins, turned out to have a gift for flowers. She designed the cutting gardens and the bridal bouquets, and her Instagram account for the farm hit 100,000 followers before I even learned how to use the app myself. Thomas started driving out most Friday afternoons with the boys. He never said much at first, just rolled up his sleeves and fixed whatever was broken that week. Irrigation valves, tractor hitches, the ice machine in the store. One evening, I found him on his knees in the barn sanding the old Whitaker sign Henry had carved in 1978. He'd found it half-burned in the rubble and kept it all this time. When I walked in, he didn't look up, just kept sanding. Slow and careful. I figured the new sign looked too shiny. He muttered, "This one's got character." I stood there until my throat stopped hurting, then laid my hand on the back of his neck like when he was 8 years old and had fallen off the hay wagon. "Thank you, son." He nodded, eyes wet, and kept sanding. Ruth Ann was the last to come all the way back. She showed up one Thursday in July with Mark and their little girl Sophie, who was recovering from a tonsillectomy and wanted nothing but Grammys, frozen peaches. Ruth Ann looked thinner, eyes puffy. Mark hovered like a man expecting to be yelled at. "I left the influencer stuff," she said quietly while we shelled peas on the porch. "Turns out chasing perfection online makes you really miserable in person." I didn't gloat. I just handed her another bowl. "You can chase perfection in the dirt if you want," I told her. "Tomatoes don't care how many filters you use." She laughed through tears and stayed the whole weekend. By Sunday she was barefoot in the blueberry rows helping customers. Sunburned and happy in a way I hadn't seen since she was 12. Jessica was the hardest nut. Pride ran strong in that one. She came to every grandbaby event but kept her distance, polite and cool. Then one October morning she appeared alone at 7 a.m., still in yoga clothes, eyes red. "I owe you an apology the size of Texas," she said without greeting. "I was ugly to you when you were hurting worse. I don't have an excuse, just shame." I was planting garlic, hands black with soil. I looked up at her standing there in her $1,000 sneakers, soon to be ruined. "Apology accepted," I said. "Now grab a dibber and get to work. These cloves won't plant themselves." She stared, then laughed. The first real laugh I'd ever heard from her. She kicked off the sneakers, rolled up her leggings, and knelt beside me. By noon we were filthy and giggling like girls. She's been out every Saturday since, running the farm store register on busy weekends and arguing with Margaret about profit margins like she was born to it. 4 years after the fire, on the exact anniversary, we closed the farm to the public and threw a private party under the pecan trees. Just family, Alexander and Lily, Margaret, a few key crew members, long tables, white tablecloths, fried chicken, and 7 kinds of pie. The babies not babies anymore ran wild with mason jars full of lightning bugs. Benny played guitar. Thomas grilled. Ruth Ann and Jessica strung extra lights while bickering over symmetry. Kayla arranged sunflowers in old buckets. Mark took pictures nobody posed for. Alexander found me sitting on the porch steps watching it all. "Looks like you grew more than blueberries, Clara," he said, settling beside me with a creak of knees. "Turns out ashes make good fertilizer," I answered. He chuckled. "Your Henry would be proud." "He's here," I said. "I feel him every time the wind moves through those trees." Lily came running up then, barefoot and freckled, holding out a crown she'd woven from a clover. "For the queen of the farm," she announced. I let her set it on my gray hair. Everybody clapped and whistled. I laughed until my ribs hurt. Later, when the moon was high and the little ones were asleep on quilts under the tables, Alexander stood and tapped his glass. To Clara May Whitaker, he said, voice carrying over the quiet. Who taught an old capitalist that some things aren't for sale, and some things are worth more than money? They raised their glasses, my children, their spouses, my grandbabies half asleep on their laps, and drank to me. I looked around at all of them, faces soft in the lantern light, and felt something settle in my chest, warm and solid and finally peaceful. The farm was whole again, bigger, different, but the heart was the same, and so was mine. You know, sometimes life burns everything you love, right down to the ground, and in that terrible moment, the people you thought would carry you are the very ones who step back and call you a burden. That pain cuts deeper than any flame. I know it, I lived it. But listen to me, darling, ashes are not the end, ashes are seedbed. I learned that the hard way. I learned that dignity is not something children can give or take away. It lives inside your bones, quiet and waiting for you to stand up and claim it. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean you go back to being small so others can feel tall again. Real forgiveness is letting them watch you rise, taller than ever, and still leaving the gate open when they're ready to walk through it with humble hearts. I'm 71 now. Every morning I still walk those rows at sunrise. The coffee still percolates while the rooster fusses. Grandbabies, big ones, now still run barefoot, chasing the same chickens their parents chased. And when the wind moves through my pecan trees, Henry is right there, rocking on the porch beside me. Your fire might look different than mine. Maybe it's betrayal, sickness, emptiness in a marriage, a child who forgot you, a dream that died. Whatever it is, do not let anybody, not even the ones who share your blood, convince you that because you lost everything, you are nothing. You are the seed. So tell me, my love, when your whole world burned, what did you decide to grow in its place? If this story touched something tender in you, leave me a little heart or share it with someone who needs to hear they're stronger than the ashes. And if you haven't already, come sit with us every weeks, subscribe. Darlin', Auntie May will leave the porch light on for you. I love why single quotes all. See you in the next one.